This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
Well, thank you, first of all, just thank you for coming. When you saw the word conflict in the title, you didn't just decide you had something better to do this evening and you turned up. So already I feel like, you're brave for coming. The conflict isn't a popular topic. There's a lot of people who would prefer not to dedicate an evening to thinking about conflict. So I work for a charity that's called Peacemakers, and it has as its aim to educate for peace. And it works in schools, and it works to give children and young people the skills of conflict resolution and peacemaking and the responsibility for it in the school. And we also work with them in other ways to do peace building, how they can be peace builders. And as part of that, I have become very interested in something called restorative justice, and I've become a restorative facilitator, which is a lot like a mediator in a way, but it's a slightly different approach. So one of the things I do in Triratna is mediate some of our conflicts. And I also do it in other places. I do it in workplaces, I've done it in families, I've done it in teams all over the place. So conflict resolution has become a very strong interest of mine. And along with that is conflict resolution what we're interested in, or is it something else? Hence the title of Conflict Transformation. So that's just a bit about why I'm talking about it. And maybe about why is it needed. I mean, I swear this is true, but here I am going to come to the centre to give a talk on conflict resolution. I'm walking from Maitri Sara's house down Station Road in Kings Heath. And as I'm walking along, of course I'm thinking about the talk, I suddenly sort of realised that Station Road's quite a narrow road and there's cars parked either side, and there was this standoff with a row of cars here and a row of cars here and nowhere for anybody to go. And there are people shouting and getting out of their cars and yelling, and I can't quite work out what's happening, but there's this definite energy and this definite sort of sense of something going on, and I suddenly feel myself conflict. It's conflict. I'm sort of being, my heart's beating a bit faster, I'm a bit sort of more alert, I'm thinking, should I do anything? I'm a peacemaker, should I be doing anything? No, this isn't my conflict, let's not, move on. But, there's a whole little flurry of things. So conflict is all around us, and we don't need to look very far for it. But I want to focus here on interpersonal conflict. I'm not talking about violence, I'm not talking about war, I'm talking about interpersonal conflict, where maybe we can have, we are a party in it, and so therefore we can do some work on ourselves. Obviously there are connections with these bigger questions, but I'm focusing on the conflicts we have with our partners, with our colleagues, with our neighbours, with even our friends in the Sangha, even with order members, yes. And yes, I'm going to be talking about it as a potentially transformational thing. There's nothing innately transformative about conflict. I'm going to be talking about what we might be able to do with it. But why, I sort of feel a bit bad. It's like nobody comes along and gives a talk about the transformative power of a day at the beach, do they? It's like, it's always something a little bit hard. And I think, it's that grit, isn't it? We need some grit. We know that dukkha or suffering is one of, that can lead to faith, and there's something about working against the grain that can give us some transformational effects. So I'm going to be talking not so much about conflict resolution, about what you might do to try and resolve a conflict between you and another person, but what you do on your side of the conflict. Because sometimes the other person doesn't want to engage at all with you, or sometimes the other person, is somebody you've never met in real life because they're a politician or somebody else who's telling us things that we vehemently disagree with. But we're still in a sense of conflict. And so what do we do on our end? The bit that as Buddhists we say, it's like you can work on yourself. And from transforming yourself, maybe we can transform the world, but don't try and change everybody else so that you don't have any conflict. That's probably not your best approach. Work on yourself, and that's what I'm going to be looking at. And it's a good, in a way, the reason it's a good topic is because it's conflict's very sticky. You know, it's like I'm walking down the road and there's people having a conflict, and you're sort of, you know, you don't always join in, but there is this sort of like, oh, what's going on? You know, you've ever been on a bus? I travel on the bus a lot, and there's, you know, a couple of people start yelling, and, you know, you can see people doing their leaning in or leaning back or reading their newspaper very carefully. You can see all of the different responses to conflict going on, because in some way or other it affects us. And what can happen then is we lose connection because of conflict. And this is why it's really important to work on our side, because when we lose connection with people, we lose that sense of them as being other, vital human beings. You know, they become other. And obviously, we know through our many, many practices of the Metta Bhavana that we're working against that sense of other. And conflict is a real way in which we other people. And that's painful because we're cut off from a sense of ourselves. And as somebody said, I read recently, it stands in the way of joy. I thought that was interesting. Conflict stands in the way of joy. And I don't know if you know, but joy is an awakening factor. Joy is something that you look for in your meditation as a sign of being able to relax and get more integrated and focused. So anything that stands in the way of that is something we need to look at, isn't it? And of course it causes suffering. It causes us and other people suffering, quite simply. Often, especially if we get stuck. And we can get stuck in conflict, which I'll look at a bit. And then ironically, it can lead us to act against our values. Our values can propel us into conflict, and then when we're in the conflict, we sort of betray those values because we're so passionate about what we do that, you know, in the end, we end up sort of doing the very thing we're accusing other people of. My story from many years ago now, I'll have to update my story, is 30... It must be about 30 years ago, not quite, 25 years ago. I had a very different job. I was working at a human rights organisation called Amnesty, and I was working on a campaign against the death penalty in the United States. And it was something, for some reason, it's something I feel very passionately about, although we've never had the death penalty in my living memory in the UK. But I feel very passionately about it, and I was very involved in this campaign. And as part of it, I became aware that one of the things that would sometimes happen outside a prison that was having an execution was a group of people who were pro-death penalty would have a party outside the gates of the prison. I still feel very moved by that. But at the time, it wasn't a kind of sad mood. It was sort of a real hatred for these people that they could do this. And it was only some time later that I thought, okay, so it's some sort of love that's wanting me to be acting against the death penalty. But then I'm feeling, and I'm angry at these people for feeling hatred towards the people. And here I am feeling hatred for them. I'm part of this vicious circle. And it was at that point that I decided to leave working there and sort of move into working more in Buddhist contexts, because I thought I've got to get more to the root of what I'm getting on. But that's an example of where your values all get... The value that drove me to work for it, I then was betraying in my feelings for those who were seen as other. Okay, so transforming. What are we transforming? Well, we're transforming our inner response. We're looking at transforming our interactions with people, our behaviour. But we're also just looking at see if we can... Eventually, what we want to do is transform the whole system. That is us. We are the system. From a sort of conflict-oriented system to a peace-oriented system, which is a tough thing to do. I don't want to make this sound easy. Many times I will be saying, there is no easy, quick way to doing this. But it is aligning our response to conflict with our aspirations to awaken from greed, hatred and delusion. That's what we're doing. the Buddha was known, amongst many things, as the Prince of Peace. There's a lovely biography of him by Jnananda in the bookshop called The Warrior of Peace, calling the Buddha the Warrior of Peace. So how do we sort of try and work on this sense of bringing in a peaceful system within us? And I just want to manage your expectations here that, I won't have sorted it out for you by the end of the talk. I'm just more giving some things that you might take away and look at. And I'm bringing in some things that I've learned from conflict resolution and peacemaking, and how they might help us in our Buddhist practice working with conflict, and then taking some things from Buddhist teachings that might sort of elevate how we think about conflict. And I'm going to do it by looking at Triratna's system of practice. So some of you will know this well, and others might not know it so well, but just in essence, the system of practice is these 5 stages of practice that we need to have a vibrant and effective spiritual practice. And they are integration of ourselves, positive emotion, receptivity, spiritual death or insight, and transformation or spiritual rebirth. So I'm going to look at what aspects of these we might strengthen when we're in conflict, how we might use them when we're in conflict, and how some strategies from conflict resolution might support our cultivation of these 5 areas. So I'm going to start where we don't usually start. I'm going to start in the middle with integration, or with receptivity. Integration is where we normally start. I'm going to start with receptivity. Because I think with conflict, it really is important to remember that little saying that somebody coined, don't just do something, sit there. And with conflict, that's just a really good thing to remember. Don't rush into it, just sit with it to start with. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about how our brains work when we're in conflict to help you understand why maybe this is particularly important. And of course, some of you may already know this. But basically, conflict plays havoc with our brain, especially that sort of heart-beating, sort of sweaty palms, flushed face sort of feeling of when we're in conflict. So it's an evolutionary response to a threat. But now that we don't have saber-toothed tigers and whatever else used to threaten us, our big threats are, they think differently than me. He wants something else than me. And those become very big threats to our sense of self, to our sense of safety, to our sense of integrity, really, as a person. And so we get all these hormones coming into our body, like the stress hormones, and we're ready for fight or flight or freeze. And it's an ancient system that was designed to work very well. And so we're completely convinced by it. It's not like we're sitting there thinking, oh, look, it's actually inhabiting us. They're not meant to be pleasant sensations. They're not meant, they're meant to make us act. And so we too often do act very quickly from those emotions because we just can't bear them. We're designed not to bear them. So once that's activated, what it does is cut off this bit of our brain, the prefrontal bit, which is where the other bit evolved first, many, many, many millennia ago. And this bit only evolved, I don't remember my history of brains, but much more recently. And that's where we empathise, that's where we problem solve, that's where we think things through. And once that's gone offline, because this other one has taken over, you can see that we're in a bit of a tricky situation if we don't stop, if we don't sit with ourselves. Because that is then followed by, we still want a story for why we're feeling like that. So we come up with a story very quickly as to why we're feeling so threatened, which usually makes us the good guy and the other person the bad guy, because otherwise we're not going to feel safe, are we? And so we've got a narrative. And strangely, you would think that, once those feelings ebbed, we wouldn't have that story anymore. But because that story had so much power, so much emotion locked in it, we kind of can really identify with that story for quite a long time. possibly forever. So we get trapped in one perspective, one interpretation, one story, one narrative. And out of that comes quite a lot of suffering. So what do we do instead, when that's happening, is that receptivity to just be. So everything we practice in meditation of sitting with uncomfortable feelings could stand us in good stead at this point if we can just learn to be with the sensations and the feelings. So sensations and feelings have a lifespan. They kind of arise, they have a sort of life, and then they kind of fade away if you can stick with them. Thoughts don't have that same lifespan. They can just regurgitate and go round and round and round. If you've ever tried to just say, I'm not going to think about it anymore, and then it's back, and before you know it, you've gone round another 10 times. It just can, it's like that one's on Duracell batteries and the others are on the ordinary. It just keeps on going. So by identifying much more with bodily sensations and feelings and giving much less weight to our thoughts is our first step with transforming our response to conflict. Because those emotions and memories will lodge in us. They will lodge in us physically. And the releasing of them is to actually feel them all the way through. Let them come through you. And it's receptivity. It's got an edge, of vulnerability in it, hasn't it, to be receptive, I think, to be truly receptive. And vulnerability is such an important quality in transforming conflict. To be, first of all, vulnerable with yourself, so that your narrative isn't explaining everything away, but you can sit with the uncertainty and the unknown. The vulnerability to not be completely sure you're right. The vulnerability to, stay with difficult emotions. And not to go into fixing or diffusing or ranting or managing or feeding or whatever. There's lots of ways we can be instead. So, staying in the present, letting go of the story, tuning into the body, that receptivity. And then you can listen. Then you can really listen to yourself, to what, is there another smaller voice with a different story or with a different response? And you could potentially listen to the other person. Because remember, the other person is having all of this going on. And that might help you understand why they are. When somebody is just coming at you with a lot of stuff and you're feeling pinned back, knowing that their system is flooded with adrenaline and that their ability to reason and empathise has gone offline for a while, and that maybe you can just sit and wait until that has worked its way through and they've regulated again. There's no point trying to talk to somebody who's gone offline. There's a little, it's a gesture for this in conflict resolution. It's like, normally this is your primitive brain and it's carefully protected by your other part of your brain, your empathizing prefrontal cortex. But you flip your lid and then suddenly this one's in control because you flipped your lid. You can't talk to somebody who's flipped their lid. You've got to wait till they've come back online and regulated. So that's what we might do around receptivity. Integration. Integration's a bit more fun in a way. So integration is about kind of getting all of ourselves on going in the same direction, going towards enlightenment. It's working with those different energies and those different parts of ourselves. So it's really about understanding ourselves very well. And understanding what happens to you in conflict is a really good test. So Bhante Sangharakshita used to I've heard him say at any rate, if you think you're enlightened, go and spend a week with your family. You could also say, if you think you're enlightened, go and get yourself into a conflict. See how you do. See if you get triggered at all. So I was really excited about a year ago when I heard and I cannot remember which order member it was, but it was those who know the Body of Bliss, the two people who are doing the Body of Bliss teachings.
Dayajyoti Nageshwara.
I think it was Nageshwara said it. That he'd found, and I haven't been able to corroborate this, that the original meaning of samadhi, so samadhi, do people know the term samadhi? It's a sense of absorption. It's a beautiful state of absorption in meditation when all of yourself feels gathered together and you're sort of centered. There, really there. That its original meaning was when there'd been a conflict in a village, that they would gather people together and try and sort of untangle the connections between them and then reconnect them. So it's that. You can see how it's similar to untangling your own inner energies. But I was terribly excited that there was this link between meditation and conflict resolution. That some, and you can see it. It's like, how do you, what are you bringing to the conflict if you're all tangled up and unsure? And if you've kind of worked on that, then maybe the conflict's going to be easier to untangle as well. But how do we get to know ourselves in this way when we're in the conflict? Often it's all happening quite fast. So a good thing to do is practice with little conflicts. Not all conflicts have us, activating, and going offline. Some conflicts are just about, I don't want pizza, I want Indian. It's like there are different levels of conflict where we can practice some of this work. And then there are ones that aren't quite as simple as pizza or Indian, but that, maybe happen repetitively with people you know. Those of you who live with somebody, is there one about the dishwasher and how the dishwasher should be loaded? So there seems to be a lot of heat in relationships around washing up in general, between parents and children and between partners. So practice with those sorts of conflicts. And one of the things to practice is what's your conflict really about? A conflict is rarely about what it seems to be about. Is the argument about the washing up really about the washing up? What's important about that to you or to your partner? And so trying to do a bit of excavation about what's really important. Is it really about respect? What's important about respect to you? Is it about being listened to? Is it about competence, being seen as competent? My way of filling the dishwasher is perfectly all right. I'm a competent person. I want that recognised. You can tell that in my household I'm the one who gets told off for doing the dishwasher wrong. I'm perfectly capable, just because it's not the way you think it should be done. I mean, to be fair, my partner thinks there's a right way up to have an oatcake to put a spread on. So, he'll be so pleased that I've made fun of him in a group. That would be great. What are your triggers? What's it really about? That's just it's something you can do with a friend when you're a bit stuck. Get them to just keep asking you, well, what's important about that to you? And you come up with an answer. But what's important about that to you? And you keep excavating down to, really what's it about? What's so important about this? Because have you ever noticed that not everybody gets upset about the same things as you do? It's terribly annoying. But it's because there are different values, different needs, different life experiences. And so we've got to dig, we've got to find out what's important about this, because it might be a value like integrity or independence or competence, but it might be because that went so badly at another time in my life and I really want it to be different this time. So there's a lot of excavating to do, and to try and do that work before you fall into a conflict. So it's sort of a bit about doing your own work and being responsible, having ownership for yourself. Very common ones are to look at the power. Are you know, something about power trigger you? It's a big trigger for a lot of people. Is there something about identity in it? Or is there something about a value you hold? And then another thing to think about with integration and getting to really know yourself is, how do you do conflict? And this is, you know, a fun activity if we had longer, but there are generally seen to be 4 or 5 different main ways that people do conflict. And often you're in conflict with the way somebody else is doing conflict. So it's not so much about the topic, but, you know, they're not engaging or they're being too pushy, you know, it's that, you know, how you're doing it. So one way you might do it is you're a warrior. Have we got any warriors in the room? I know we've got one, but I'm not going to look at her. Oh, I'm looking at you. I know you too well. So there's the warrior. Only one warrior. Only somebody who's ready for the conflict. You know, let's get it out. Let's have it. Let's, you know, have our argy-bargy. They're often motivated. Every type has got a treasure, really, that they're holding. And the treasure for a warrior is justice or rightness. You know, this is morally right. This can't be unquestioned. So they're a warrior. And you might not think you're warriors, but you might be warriors in certain situations. If something happened, you'd be like, no, that's not right. We can't accept that. But each type has also got a bit of a shadow side. So you think you're there being a warrior, standing up for right and justice and truth, single truth. And other people might be experiencing you more as a dictator. More of a my way or the highway, it's got to go my way. You know, I'm right, I'm not going to be budged. And there's, of course, a continuum between the warrior and the dictator. And, you know, we don't always know quite which, you know, we've edged a little bit too far. And that's where spiritual friendship can come in. It's like, how do I come across? What I want to do is, you know, sort of, I really care passionately about this topic and I really want us to do what's right, or I really want to look after this person who's, you know, I feel needs my protection. But, you know, how is it coming across? So that's one style that can find itself in the midst of a conflict. And then you've kind of got the opposite side of that, which hasn't got such a powerful archetype, but it's sometimes the teddy bear, but I think that's a bit weak. It's sort of like the facilitator, the person who wants to help, you know. So it's like, here's a solution, here's what I think, you know, I could do this for you. They're sort of willing to give up more of what they want, you know, to facilitate a solution. You know, let me help sort this out. Couldn't we do this? You know, that sort of helpful person. Have we got any of those people in? The helpful facilitator? No? Oh. Who are you all going to be? Oh, this is very exciting.
Please give us all the options first.
Yes, that's right. Maybe afterwards I'll check. But the shadow side of the teddy bear, any guesses? What might be the shadow side? Where might they go when it's not being so healthy? Any thoughts?
Being just a bit nice.
Pardon?
Being a bit nice.
Too nice. A bit of a doormat, maybe. A bit trodden. You know, it's like none of their needs are coming into the picture. It's all, whatever you need, whatever will make you happy. Appeasing. That can be very helpful when, you know, sort of person when you know, just really, your system's all upset. They're a great person to say, oh, I'll get you a cup of tea and I'll do this and I'll, and maybe I could speak to them and, you know, or if they're the one in conflict with you, well, maybe, you know, but maybe I was wrong, you know, it's like that sort of, you know, they're taking the sting out very quickly. And then you've got the peacekeeper, the person who is, the treasure, of the facilitator person is harmony. They want harmony. They want they care about relationships very strongly. Then you've got the peacekeeper, whose treasure is safety. How do we keep everyone safe? And it's sort of like, well, can we just calm down? Can we just, maybe we could just let this go? Maybe we don't have to talk about this. Maybe, it's not that important, and if we all sleep on it, it'll be fine tomorrow. Sort of the peacekeeper. And their shadow is just asleep. They're not conflict, what conflict? Or, I don't think this is very important. But yeah, I'll come back when we're talking about meditation. It's like conflict, I want to go there. And the last side is the peacemaker. And that's what I have learnt to do, and that is, their treasure is that there are many truths, many perspectives that will make up the picture of what's actually happened and therefore what needs to happen. So they're trying to make peace by listening to different parties. They're trying to forge solutions. They're encouraging people to think about what they need, and can you think about what the other person might need, and the peacemaker. And their shadow, interesting, I wonder if anybody can guess what their shadow is. It made me laugh, given that it's my part of my job.
Non-committal? Non-committal?
I think that is an opposite. It's not the one that's chosen, but I think that is that. They're always sitting on the fence. They're never saying what they think. But and maybe it connects. So the one in the literature that I'm calling on for this is saviour. The saviour, that they can solve everything and resolve everything, and maybe there is a non-committal aspect in that, actually. So I don't know if do people feel that none of those are their type?
Can it depend on the scenario?
Huh?
Can it depend on the scenario?
Oh, it very much can, yes.
And the roles change.
Yes. Oh, very much. And what it's about. So I can be quite warrior-like if we're going to be talking about thinking. We start talking about feelings, and I'm sort of edging away slightly. So, yeah, we can definitely be different in different scenarios. But it's getting to know what you are in different scenarios, and if you're on the skillful edge of that, would be your first sort of integrating aspect. Is like, am I really what I think I am? Because, ask other people, and they might say, well, actually, no, I think you're more asleep than you think you've got to engage, or no, you're just too strong, or and it's also learning how to move out of your comfort zone to one of the other ones if it's needed. Like if you're in a situation, you're not a natural warrior, but you're in a situation where an injustice is happening, can you learn to inhabit that? And if you are a warrior and everybody's being a warrior and nobody's kind of making peace, can you step into that because it's needed? Because nobody else is doing it and we're just constantly in battle. So it's that integration of, in a way, what we're saying is we've got all of those potentially in us. And can we, work on strengthening them so that we can bring in the energy and the treasure that's needed in a situation.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. Is there one where you could be a victim?
So this is talking about when you're actually in a conflict. So
Yes.
in a conflict, any one of those styles could be a victim, and that's how you would respond.
Could you respond to conflict by being a victim? By blaming everyone else?
Yeah,
conflict and
definitely.
Like, pour me.
But you can do it in different styles. So you could be a warrior victim. Nobody understands me.
Okay.
Nobody's engaging with me. I'm the one who suffered.
Yes.
Or you could be, a sort of more peacekeeper, a sleep victim of,
Yes.
the reason I'm not going there is that, I'm not equipped because I've been hurt and it's too scary to engage. So you could, I don't know what the peacemaker victim would be. Nobody listens to me. Nobody listens to all my wonderful wisdom, and they just go off and do it all wrong.
Yes.
Suddenly goes into a bit of the dictator. But yes, and the warrior can have a passive aggressive. So it can be quite aggressive. It can also be passive aggressive.
Okay.
So you can see how some of those styles can also just come into conflict. So the warrior, for example, if you want to drive a warrior mad, refuse to engage. Please don't. It causes a lot of suffering. I do have quite a lot of these where there's somebody who really wants to sort out a conflict and other people just won't go there. Probably because they're either on one of these two, the sort of teddy bear or the asleep person, and they don't want to engage in conflict. And you think it's not causing any harm, but it can cause quite a lot of suffering if you won't engage. Of course, you do need your boundaries to be sure it's safe to engage. I'm not saying engage with, like the potential fight starting on Station Road about the traffic, Okay, so that's the integration side of what, just some tips, some thoughts of where that we might not have thought about exploring about our own personality and responses. And then positive emotion is the one I'm not going to talk about so much because I think, in a way, it's quite obvious what the gift in positive emotion is in Buddhist practice. You'll all have done it. So the Metta Bhavana is just a wonderful tool to work with the emotions that flood us in conflict, which are often very negative, aren't they? And the Metta Bhavana and also the other practices that link with Metta Bhavana, so compassion practice and equanimity practice, and the rejoicing, the mudita. What do we call it? But what's the translation of mudita we usually use? Sympathetic joy. Thank you. They're a wonderful practice to keep the humanity of the other person, the person you're in conflict with, alive, and remembering that you don't know somebody's whole story. You only know a slice of what's happening, and you haven't walked in their shoes. Just throw in this little story from when we work with. So we work with a lot of 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and there's one activity that they just seem to love. It's very simple. It's 2 footprints cut out of paper and put on the floor, and you're telling a story, and then you're asking them to come and stand in the footsteps. We call them empathy footsteps, and you stand in the footsteps and you say, how might different characters in the story be feeling? So that they're trying to think, how might this person feel, how might this person feel? And we had this several times from teachers, but one teacher was saying she was in her classroom and the kid came rushing in from the playground saying, we need the empathy footsteps, we've got conflict in the playground and we need to take the empathy footsteps outside so that we can see how the people might feel. Didn't understand why they needed the actual little cut-out footprints, but that's the literalness of children, isn't it? So if that helps you remember, it's like empathy footsteps. Can you do empathy footsteps when you're feeling that the other person is wrong and bad and out to get you and all of those, the places we go. Okay, where do we go into insight next? Insight, spiritual depth. This is really the wisdom teachings of Buddhism, and what do they have to offer us when we are in conflict? And I found this the hardest bit to think about. Not because there aren't many teachings that relate, but because there are loads. And I just fear that it makes it sound like, oh, well, I'll just think non-duality, for example. There's no separation, so there's no non-duality, so there's no conflict. And that's not transforming anything. It's not transforming you. It's not transforming your own interior sort of peace system. It's just sticking an idea onto something and trying to miss out all the messy steps. So that was my fear, is that by bringing in the wisdom aspect, we sort of forget about sitting with the painful emotions, putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, learning what our triggers are, that we can't miss those things out. there's this phrase, spiritual bypassing. I don't know if you've heard, where you kind of take an idea and you bypass what's actually going on for yourself and just say, oh, well, now I'm here. I don't need to worry about, I don't know, difficult relationships or something. And so it's like how to avoid thinking like that. And there was a phrase used in a seminar I was in yesterday about something else, but I kept finding it really useful when I thought about this, which is use the stairs, not the lift. Bit cryptic, but it's like do the steps of integration, of sitting with it, of empathy, of what is this really about? Why does this matter to me so much? All of that work before you are going to a wisdom perspective. So take the stairs, not the lift. Don't go straight to, there is no subject-object duality, so, hey, you can't really have a conflict. But, there are lots of wisdom teachings that are pointing exactly at this. I think in the Dhammapada, the Buddha says something like, the wise man knowing that death could come at any time will resolve all his conflicts. There's that thinking of death and, in the light of death, how much does this actually matter? There is, in the Tibetan tradition, they have some mind trainings, and one of them says, give the victory to the other. It's quite a strong teaching, give the victory to the other. And then, of course, there is the no self. There is no fixed, permanent self to protect, so why would I be in conflict? Because, there isn't an unchanging me to be bothered by all of this. But all of those you could take the lift. If, there's a danger you'd take the lift with them. So, make sure you take the stairs. It's much healthier, apparently, take the stairs. So I was trying to think, well, which ones have I actually seen work to some, they might not be sitting there going through the wisdom teachings, but I could say, oh, well, in a way, that's come into play. And one thing, a friend of mine, I've seen her do really well with a persistent conflict that she's been in, is using mindfulness as a insight practice, really. And I've got another friend who has this wonderful teaching that I think fits here. She does a lot of mindfulness teaching, and she says that she talks about us as the unreliable witness to our own lives. We are an unreliable witness. Because, there's lots of research to back this up, that, there was this quote I read in a book called Stumbling on Happiness. Research suggests that when it comes to collecting and analysing facts about ourselves and our experiences, most of us have the equivalent of an advanced degree in really bad science. It's like we are, confirmation bias. We are only trying to confirm things that fit with what we already think. We've got really wrong ideas about what will make us happy. We project into the future from where we're feeling now. There's all sorts of ways in which we are unreliable witnesses to our own experience and to our own truth, you could say. So it's like you do need to come back to your experience, but try not to really think you've got it right. It's like you working with this sense of really noticing what is actually going on, and am I just sort of slightly skewing the facts in my favour? Am I slightly only noticing the things that back up what I already think? Trying to become a more reliable witness, basically, I think is a insight practice, and I think it is one that would really pay off when you are trying to transform how you are within conflict, so that you're being curious. You're being truly curious about your experience rather than using the lazy kind of, that one worked earlier, so I'll take it now as truth.
10 minutes.
Thank you. And the other one is about trying to keep in connection. Trying to keep in connection with the person or people that you're in conflict with, even if you've never met them. And this is something that I would say has changed me most. So as I say, I'm a restorative facilitator. A few years ago, I heard somebody who was very experienced in restorative practice be asked the question, what makes a successful restorative process? And I think we were all expecting to hear, they come to a solution, they agree on something, they hear each other, all of these sorts of things. But she said, in her view, a successful restorative process was when you, as facilitator, kept your connection, your inner connection with all parties. And I thought that was just very strong. So it's that, in a way, we're talking about love when we talk about connection. About can you keep it when, everything goes to pot. You think you're making progress and then somebody throws in a bombshell or gets completely triggered or, brings in another whole thing. There's just all these ways in which when I'm facilitating conflicts, it goes wrong or it doesn't go as I can't help but think it might go. So having no expectations is another great teaching, but that one is trust me, very hard to really, really do. You can pretend you don't have any expectations, but when you get upset, you realise you did have some. So working to stay in connection, which doesn't mean agreeing. It doesn't mean, I'm not too sure about give the victory to the other, because if you don't really believe it, what are you doing? You can only do that if you truly think that it's not something that's going to come back and you're then going to defend it again. You've got to be able to give up defending it. But if you can just sit with them in connection whilst knowing that you disagree, that's really strong practice, actually. And feeling the love, the metta. So really, what I'm coming back down to is metta and mindfulness, but as insight practices. And I think they're always a really good place to come back to. Yeah, because to really stay connected, you've got to not be defending yourself. That's a really strong practice, not to defend yourself. But not defending yourself doesn't mean that you're saying you're right or I agree. You're just not justifying, you're not keeping the heat going, you're not keeping it going. So, I thought this would take less time, I'm sorry. Acceptance was the last thing I wanted to say, is that at a certain level, what I am not saying with this is that use all of this, learn all of this, and you will resolve all your conflicts. One of the things I think we have to do is accept that some conflicts don't get resolved. That we live in samsara and we can't fix samsara. And we hear that a lot, but we're always trying to fix samsara. And sometimes with some conflicts, they're not fixable at this level, not until we evolve somewhere else, until we transform more. So can you really accept that some things can't get resolved, not with the parties who are there? So the last stage is rebirth or transformation, where something new comes. So what is the new thing? What is the transformation that can happen if you stay with conflict and you stay within yourself and you stay in connection and you are working on what you're owning what you're bringing and you're being vulnerable and open. So I think that is where you get beyond labels and beyond judgments. But again, I've got this warning: take the stairs, not the lift. That it's not saying don't engage, just non-duality. That's the answer to everything. It's the vision of where, when you really do the work, you can get to. So I'm going to use Rumi's poem that many of you will know to sum up what this is, what this might look like, what the vision of transformation might be. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. So mostly I think we home in on out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. There's a field, I'll meet you there, which is a beautiful, beautiful line and aspiration. But for me, the phrase that really hits is don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep. So please don't go to sleep around conflict. It doesn't take anything forward. And the going to sleep might be staying stuck in anger. It might be just avoiding. It might be not bringing yourself in, not engaging. However you do it, can we instead create spaces that are both safe and brave, where we can learn to disagree better?
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you